Irritable bowel syndrome is a condition that affects as many as 45 million people in the US alone. With a variety of painful, intrusive, and often embarrassing digestive symptoms, IBS can sometimes be a strain in relationships. Some of its sufferers even claim that they find dating with this condition impossible. One Redditor, however, was very happy with her husband who suffered from IBS. That was, until she made a horrifying discovery. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the story of the poop jars. This video is sponsored by Beam. I love to sleep, but I hate going to sleep. And I imagine a lot of you feel the same way. It's like I'm tired, then all of a sudden I lay down, and I'm wide awake thinking about everything that I should have been thinking about during the day. And this is where Beam's Dream Powder comes in. Dream Powder is a hot cocoa mix with a variety of sleep-promoting ingredients, such as reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, and melatonin. It's available in a version that contains CBD and one without CBD. Both formulas will help you go to sleep and stay asleep, leaving you to wake up refreshed without feeling any grogginess. There's a wide variety of tasty flavors with no added sugar, only 15 calories in total. Just take 1 to 2 scoops and mix it in with a hot cup of water or milk, and then drink it about a half hour, 45 minutes before you go to sleep. I've tried a lot of sleep-promoting supplements in the past, and I was actually flabbergasted by how well this one worked. Subscribe and save 20%, plus an additional 15%, and a free frother with my code WANG when you hit the link in the description below. That's up to 35% off the original price. And you can pause, skip, or cancel at any time, so there's no risk. Once again, that's code WANG. In February of 2022, a Reddit user named SplurtSplurt made a horrifying discovery involving her husband. So she does what any reasonable person does, ask Reddit for advice. She creates a thread in r/true off my chest. I found out that my husband is storing sealed jars of his diarrhea. I only found this out a few hours ago, and I'm not sure how to deal with this, so any help or advice is appreciated. While cleaning out the kitchen pantry, I, 24 female, was dusting the top shelf, which I can't see on top of, and noticed the clang of jars up there. So I got out the stepladder, and up there is 14 jars filled to the brim with diarrhea and sealed with lids. The consistency in the jars ranges from brown water to a thick black sludge, like a mixture of blended slugs. And you have to wonder why, of all the possible frames of references you have for a turd smoothie, it's blended slugs. And at the same time, that comparison is actually very helpful for picturing the kind of shine it probably had. The jars are arranged in order from most watery to most viscous. And with this level of organization, ordering them from Jamba Juice to motor oil, it makes me wonder if what's going on here is some kind of OCD or autism type brain situation. But I'm not here to diagnose, I'm just here to present the facts. And there's a lot that we have to consider about the process here. For starters, there's just no way you're filling up an entire jar in one go of diarrhea. I don't care how irritable your bowels are. So you have to be taking multiple trips to get this accomplished. Either going back and forth to his secret shelf with the fresh jar, or he's got at any given time an active jar in a second hiding spot. And since the jars are organized in order of viscosity, does that mean he mentally sorts his shits into different types? Or maybe, he just has, one active jar at a time and he fills it up and lets the dice fall where they may. When the jar is full, he puts it in where it belongs in the order. And somehow he's doing this undetected for what's presumably years. I only know it's diarrhea in the jars because I made the mistake of opening out and the stench is unmistakably the same as what he leaves behind in the bathroom. The smell was so bad I could still feel it burning the back of my throat. It makes me think of when the pony cum jar guy just started gasping for air when he opened his jar up. Kinda crazy though, she wouldn't have known these were jars of shit if it didn't smell like his specific brand. It's like a fingerprint for your ass. I only live with my husband, 42 male, and he has grim and gruesome IBSD. His words. IBSD, as you've probably figured out, being the flavor of IBS that's diarrhea oriented. But I'm just lost for words as to why he would poo into jars to be sealed and kept. Do I tell him what I found? Do I just get rid of them? I can only imagine the amount of distress he would be put into if, she just went and threw them all out. It would be like when I was a kid and my grandmother accidentally threw out all my comics. Except, even worse, because, it's not like I made the comics myself. At this point, though, of course, the greatest minds of Reddit had some ideas. Mostly puns that won the internet and made people guffaw.
TLDR, woman used stepladder to find stool. Poop jokes are my favorite, but they're a solid number 2. Unfortunately for this lady, her husband doesn't have solid number 2s. Another user had an idea about how she can assert dominance. Don't say anything. Start filling your own jars with your own green apple splatters, seal them and put them right next to his. Amid all the jokes though, there actually was one single solitary idea that might have actually been what was possibly happening. A user named TieSnap suggested that perhaps since the husband has IBS, maybe he was holding on to the samples to show his doctor at a later date and figure out what's going on. Which honestly, that explanation doesn't make all that much sense to me. I mean, if that were the case, he'd probably be contacting his doctor right away. And the doctor would then tell him to provide whatever samples he's got to provide right away and not, store them in jars for who knows how long, in the pantry with all your food. There's just no way the doctor suggested, yeah, what you're gonna do is you're gonna take the jar and store your shit in it and put it up in the pantry like it was grandma's special sauce from the old country. The other suggestion they made, which was more plausible to me, maybe this was a scat fetish thing. Or, maybe OP made it all up. A lot of posters provided their evidence of why they thought this was fake, with many of them homing in on the fact that this was an account created 6 days prior named Splurt. I don't think that's especially convincing, as the people who tell stories like this on Reddit typically do have a throwaway account, and they usually do have some kind of name relating to the story. Although it is a bit odd that the account was created 6 days before and not the same day. Maybe there were previous attempts by the account to get traction on the story and they deleted those attempts. Others suggested this could be real because people surprisingly do this a lot with piss bottles. Granted, the piss bottle thing tends to happen more often because of laziness. It's like they don't feel like getting up and interrupting gamer time to go pee, so I've got a bunch of Baja Blasts sitting around, so I'm just gonna fill them up and leave them there. But you don't store shit in a jar out of laziness. This takes effort. Like, the only scenario I could picture this being a real thing is if the guy just had some kind of mental compulsion where I just gotta do it. In any case, they make an update a week later. After having what she describes as a mini mental breakdown, she confronts her husband about the poop jars. She asks him if there was anything he happened to be storing up there in the pantry. Of course, he said no. So what she does then is she takes all 14 jars, puts them out on the kitchen table, and brings them down to look at them. Confronted with the jars, the husband explains that actually these weren't jars of diarrhea. They were in fact exotic jams that had expired.
Believe it all you want, that won't make it true.
The wife had had enough. I told him to stop lying and just tell me the truth if he was pooing into jars or not, and why he was keeping them. He finally cracked and got angry at me asking what the big deal was and that he wasn't hurting anyone. So I threw the jars in the garbage outside. He wasn't happy when I did this and physically tried to restrain me by grabbing my wrist and hitting my side. I didn't speak to him for the rest of the day and holed up in the spare room as he had scared me. I checked the garbage later in the day and the jars were gone. He had taken them out and put them somewhere else. In this moment, I know he has chosen jars of curdled turds over his own wife.
Oh, he's a madman! A madman!
Hello, base department? My aim was to get the locks changed when he went to work the next day and kick him out, but I chickened out of that idea. I asked him to leave to give me some space, but he said that he owns the house and that I live here for free. I more than pay the rent by cleaning up the house all day, washing his clothes, and cooking all his meals. Well, I mean, if you think about it, if you're cooking all his meals, in some way, the diarrhea is kind of your fault. Ultimately, she winds up moving in with her sister and brother-in-law. She ignores her husband's calls, and she plans to file for a divorce. Not because of the jars, but because he hurt her when he was trying to protect the jars. Which honestly, if is a real story, that makes sense. As grossed out as she was mainly just trying to figure out what was going on here. Sometimes in relationships, your partner might just be up to some weird shit, but you work through it. But when your husband hits you over his diarrhea stash, it's probably time to call it quits. In any case though, I have a feeling this one's fake. But a lot of you asked me to cover it, and I feel like I've had too many G-rated videos on the channel lately. In any case, there you have it. The legend of the Reddit diarrhea jars.
Ah, yes. The miracle of childbirth. The magical day when a little gut gopher tunnels its way out of the breathing canal to join us here on this dump. It almost brings a tear to your eye. Or in the case of some Redditors, a tear to your dick. Yes, this is a video about people who get a little bit too excited about childbirth.
That is seriously fucked up.
So for this episode of Tales from the Internet, Let's take a look at the story of a woman who found out that her own childbirth video was being enjoyed by members of a certain subreddit, despite never having actually uploaded it herself. A lot of women's greatest fear is to have their pussies wind up on the internet. Well, imagine all that happening, with a slimy little cranium shoving its way out of it. Just as up close and personal as you can get for thousands of people to view. Well, that's exactly what happened to a Redditor named Birth Tape Throwaway on r/relationship advice. The post was entitled, "My birth video ended up on a fetish subreddit because of my husband." We're off to a good start. She begins by saying that since her husband uses Reddit, it was very likely that he would see this thread about this topic which she at the time was yet to confront him about. She speaks of what a good husband he's always been and what a great father he's been to their children. So of course, he was very supportive when she said that she wanted to do her second pregnancy a little bit differently. She had a very difficult time with her first childbirth and felt traumatized by her experience at the hospital. So this time around, she wanted to have a home birth. So they got a midwife, and with her husband being a nurse, he could lend any assistance if need be. And sure enough, for her the home birth went a lot better than the birth at the hospital. And they even hired a professional photographer and had the midwife take a video. That recording, of course, was meant to stay private. She saved it on a USB hard drive and locked it away in a chest, never to be seen again, unless, for some reason she was feeling sentimental. Every other trace of it had been deleted. Or so she thought. Now, many of her friends had uploaded their birth videos to YouTube. And I love knowing that because I said that, some amount of you are immediately just gonna pause this video and go looking for birth videos. But they felt that sharing their videos could help other women be more comfortable with home birth experiences. But she didn't feel the same way about her video. My birth didn't need to be shared with the world. It didn't need to be a teaching moment. It didn't need to exist to make others feel better. After my traumatic first birth, it was mine and I cherished it. And her husband would actually argue with her about this quite a bit. He would say things like, "It's such an excellent birth video. It would help out other women. It would help put other women at ease. But at the end of the day, it's her choice whether or not she wants thousands of people to be looking at her vagina." She says no, and he drops it. Years pass, and she doesn't think about it again. Till recently. While browsing a parenting subreddit that she frequented, she noticed a thread about non-consensual birth videos being posted to a fetish subreddit. So she's like, aha, that's exactly why I didn't upload my birth video to YouTube. But she's curious, so she takes a look through this birthing fetish subreddit and she finds a drive with hundreds of videos. She starts looking through the Google Drive and she finds her friends' birthing videos, the ones that were uploaded to YouTube. She keeps looking and then she sees it. Her own birthing video. The one that, was supposed to be locked away in a chest, never to be seen again. And this is how she reacts to this discovery. There's a close-up of, everything down there. In a fucking fetish site. My baby taking his first breaths. Me breastfeeding. It doesn't even cut off after the birth. It shows my baby getting weighed and just held. If this is a birth fetish sub, why does it feature so much of just my child? This seems like way more than just a birth fetish thing. I don't even know how to report the video. I reported the post and Reddit says it doesn't violate anything. Now, clearly she didn't upload this video herself, and there's only one other person in the world who had access to it, her husband. Did he upload it to YouTube against her will? Maybe he uploaded it directly to the fetish subreddit. And for that matter, did he also do this with her friends' videos? At this point, she hadn't confronted him about it yet, so she was on Reddit asking people how to broach the subject to her husband about how he probably exposed her vagina to thousands of strangers as well as their child. And she also wanted to see what she could do to get this removed, as Reddit had initially rejected her report. Because, they said it didn't violate any policy. Although, as one commenter pointed out, it literally does violate their policy on non-consensual intimate media. And before going directly at the husband, another poster commented, asking if perhaps it was backed up to the cloud without her realizing it, which is a vector that a lot of private images and videos get leaked. But she wasn't connected to the internet at this time, and she had sync turned off specifically for this reason. A few hours later, she updates her main post. Update, just a quick update. I left and took the kids to my mom's house. I don't know how long we'll be here. I didn't tell my husband anything. I just wanted to get the kids the fuck away from him. Even if he didn't share that video directly with those creeps, I don't want him around them. 3 days later, she returns with a brand new post. Now, she knows exactly how that video got there. So after her update, she had taken the kids to her mother's house, didn't even tell her mother why because she was too embarrassed. And she simply told the husband that she needed a break. So he keeps on texting her, asking her what happened, why she left, because this is very clearly out of the blue. And it was finally the next day that she would return home and confront him about it, recording the interaction on her mother's phone just in case things went south. Seeing him so upset about this made her start crying, and then he starts crying. And finally, she pulls herself together and shows him something on her phone. The birth video. He knows exactly what this is, and he's like, why are you showing me this? Well, she doesn't say anything. The video ends and closes out to the Google Drive, the one with hundreds of other birth videos, and then she backs out to the birthing fetish subreddit. It takes him a moment to figure out what exactly she's trying to show him here, but eventually it clicks and he's fuming. He's pacing around yelling about reporting the video, calling the FBI, and meanwhile she's screaming over him, asking him how did it get there to begin with. Eventually everyone stops yelling and there's a lengthy silence, and finally he comes clean. He started crying and told me that he had started a daddy blog a year after our first was born. He posted about being a dad and eventually about his experience with my second pregnancy. He had posted the video on YouTube to link to his blog. He felt like there wasn't enough resources out there for dads regarding pregnancy. He didn't know I didn't want to post it until a week or two after baby was here, and I was so vehement about not posting it and getting it tucked securely away on a USB. It was up for about 10 fucking months before he finally took it down. He was waiting to see if I changed my mind, and was reluctant to remove it because he'd received so many messages from thankful dads about how educational and helpful his blog/vlogging was. I had zero knowledge about this blog. I didn't even know people blogged anymore. We had both expressed many times how we didn't want to create a massive digital footprint for our children because of situations just like fucking this. So this is such a fucking weird surprise. There's hundreds of pictures of our family on this thing. And now, despite all this, he responds by saying that she was overreacting about not wanting the video uploaded. Which, to me, I don't know, like, if you find out that a collection of the biggest freaks on the internet are jerking off to a video of your child in your wife's vagina, I would think a normal person would be like, maybe you had a point. She continues the post by saying that she has plans to consult her lawyer, but she's not really sure what she wants to do about it. She has nobody to talk to about it because he's the person that she would have spoke to about it, and she's divorcing him. She's not sure if she should or even wants to call the police, and she's not sure if he should be allowed to ever see their children again. And also, how the fuck does she explain this to the rest of her family? She concludes, "The most special moment of my life is now just this fucking smear of shit, all because I decided to try and capture it for memory's sake. Something that was supposed to bring me unending joy now leaves me weeping. I keep looking at my sweet toddler and just breaking down. He didn't deserve this. I wish I could go back and never have recorded that video. I took my USB and fucking smashed it into a million pieces, just to feel like I did something. I'm tired. There's not going to be another update for a while. I am in a very dark place." As of now, the fetish subreddit as well as the one that was made to replace it have been banned. And all it took was, the post to go massively viral after Reddit initially said, this is actually fine. In 1999, on their 7th studio album entitled We Kill Everything, the band Gwar released a song that explored the logistics of incorporating fish as a device to elevate the timeless act of lovemaking. As the singer states his intended uses for the animals, river carps and moas are among the fish to be inserted in various orifices. Well, as it turns out, this kinda sorta happened to a couple of Redditors in Sweden. And there's puke involved. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the story of the midsummer fish fart. This infamous gross Reddit tale comes from a thread in January of 2014. A post by bgrizzly62 entitled, "What is your best/worst drunken sexual encounter story? NSFW. You got a story about dick blood." Not to be confused with Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, whose real name actually is Dick Blood. Amazing that with a name like Dick Blood, he played a babyface his entire career. You got a guy who fell asleep multiple times during sex and then bragged about how many times he had sex that night because he was counting each time he was awake as a new time. But as is often the case with these threads, you got one story that became the story of the whole thread. One legendary response to become part of the pantheon of horrible Reddit stories. So we got the fish fart vomit story, sometimes referred to as the fish mitten. It's told by a Swedish user named Chuff Nugget. He begins, "Have you heard of surströmming? It's rotten fermented herring, the smell of which induces a gag reflex that actually makes it impossible to eat for most normal people." He kinda gets to that description of surströmming a little quick, but I think it's necessary to hammer home just how vile this stuff is. Considered by many to be the actual worst smelling food that exists in the world, it has its origins in a 16th century preservation process that involves 6 months of fermentation. You can go on YouTube and watch tons of non-Swedish people opening cans of surströmming and gagging on the smell, trying to actually eat and hold this crap down. You even got a video of PewDiePie subjecting Rhett and Link to it. You also got Swedish people giving us instructions on how to properly eat it, which involves opening the can in a bucket as far away as you possibly can from where you actually intend to eat it. Here's an example of how bad this smells. In the 80s, a German landlord evicted one of his tenants for opening surströmming in the hallway. That sounds a little unreasonable, so it all got taken to court. And the landlord winds up winning his case after he opens up a can in the courtroom and everyone is like, "Oh yeah, this is unacceptable." These cans are so full of shitty fish gas that some airlines have banned them. Not just because of the smell, but because of a belief that they can be potentially used as explosives. There's a lot better ways to preserve a fish in the 21st century. Yet surströmming still persists because it's considered to be such an important part of Swedish culture, particularly consumed as a part of midsummer ragers. As PewDiePie puts it,
"So you eat this."
We get really drunk and we eat that.
I don't know how hard PewDiePie likes to party, but something tells me he's never had a midsummer quite like this one. Chuff Nugget continues, "Midsummer in Sweden is one hell of a party, and I can't remember a single midsummer where people haven't got royally rat-arsed or fallen over while dancing around the giant phallic symbol that we erect for the party." See what you did there, Chuff Nugget. Anyway, for those curious, here's the phallic symbol, the maypole. Mine doesn't quite look like that, but I can see what they're going for. You got a little pee hole and a couple balls there dangling off the phallus. And here's a picture of some guys erecting the pole. "Rinsing your recently abused palate of rotten fish with large quantities of vodka and aquavit can get you more drunk than you care to imagine. But, as for the frog dance, there is no excuse." The frog dance apparently being a dance where they literally jump up and down like frogs. So after a day of dancing around the big dick, jumping up and down and eating rotten fish and getting as drunk as you possibly fucking can, 6 a.m. comes around and it's time to get out of there. At this point, Chuff Nugget and his lady have put in a solid 20-something hour day of partying. And eating the grossest food in the world. It's time for a better kind of up and down. The fucking kind. 6 a.m. and the missus and I have swayed home in the lazy and meandering way that drunks have perfected over an eternity of liver abuse. We were determined to nail each other to the bed when we get home. Now, to be fair to her, she was awesome in bed. It's just that this night was about to go wrong. Terribly, terribly wrong. It's been 20 hours of drinking, so not only is Chuff Nugget struggling to stand up straight, but his dick ain't faring no better than that. So they turned to their tried and true method of manifesting hard cock from scratch. Mrs. Nugget decided that, as sitting on my face was always a dead cert for trouser snake charming, she'd hoik her grass-stained dress up and ride my face. This she did. Rather hard. I'm not only used to this, but a great fan. My tongue worked away at her feverishly. Her cute, puckered, barking spider, a bare few millimeters from my nose. I was in heaven. And, riding my face like a drunken pro, so was she. Despite the initially troublesome circumstances, they salvaged the night. He's kind of struggling a little bit to breathe in the position that he's in, but they're having a great time, they're getting close to orgasm, and then it happens. We both came, and, as fate would have it, the orgasm ripping through her body caused her to grind down harder on my face and fart, forcefully injecting undiluted rectal gases into my air-hungry nose. A full force and totally ripe, hot surströmming fart. Far worse than the initial burst of smell from the tin, clean up my nostrils. And remember that just the normal smell burst from the initial can opening already qualifies this food to many people as the worst smelling food that exists on all of planet Earth across all cultures. A smell so bad that people make reaction videos smelling it on YouTube so they can throw up because it's funny. The reaction was instant, and completely unaware of her crime and mistaking my convulsions as throes of ecstasy, Mrs. Nugget ground down harder on my face as I gasped for air. I know you guys like to party. So you know how just doubling over and getting that tiny bit of air can make all the difference when you're at the precipice of yakking. But there's nothing here for him. He's fucking suffocating. He's wearing a pussy gas mask, a fucking V95. The enormity of my horror peaked as, in the full grip of natural bodily rejection, I hoyed my alcohol-rich stomach content, including a large amount of undigested rotten fish, straight up her pink mitten. And now, under normal circumstances, you know, like I said, you get that little air bit of you. If you do puke a little bit, you can kind of brace it a little, you know, it's just like, you're just like, oh, bleh, I fucking puked, right? But this is one of those pukes where his body is fighting to survive. He's suffocating in there. You know that shit launched out of him like a fucking cannon. If she was pregnant, that baby is learning how to swim tonight. As the fetid herring now, deeply stuck in my nostrils, caused me to start a gagging fit that threatened to be my last, she ran, screaming to the bathroom, leaving a trail of stomach acid, alcohol, and rotten chunks of fish behind her on the floor as it gushed from her burning snatch. Just picture it. You've been partying all day, having a wonderful time with your man, 20 hours of getting shit-faced at your nation's centuries-old cultural celebration. You go home, you have a good cum, you're on top of the world, and then, boom. Your pussy is full of vomit and the chunks of the most disgusting fish on planet Earth. It's banned from airplanes, but it's inside of you. That's a hell of an emotional roller coaster right there. So, with all that being said, where are Chuff Nugget and his lady these days? You might be surprised to find out that they are no longer together. But ultimately, he did have a happy ending. This is amazing. Are you still with said lady? No, I'm not. I'm with one who detests her strumming now, and have been for a few years, kids and all. So, even if her rusty sheriff's badge loses control, it'll never be as bad as that night. And that's the story of the Redditor who puked fish guts into his girlfriend's pussy. In September of 2012, a Redditor named Kraylon was hanging out at his cousin's neighbor's house. Kraylon had only known the neighbor, who he referred to by the pseudonym Rob, for about 2 weeks. When they're in Rob's room, Kraylon begins to notice a smell. In fact, the whole room kinda smelled like doo-doo. They're sitting around and Kraylon just can't take it anymore. He has to ask, "What's that smell?" Rob shamefully points over to a half-open drawer, where they discover it. The cum boxers. Goddamn, that buildup looks like congealed pizza cheese. Kraylon shares the picture to Reddit and people are quick to ask, why are you touching it? So you gotta understand, it's not Kraylon touching it. It's Rob holding up his cum boxers like a trophy for all to see. All to be shared for that sweet Reddit karma. That right there is 7 years of hard work. And when asked why he didn't just use a paper towel or something like a normal person, he said he thought that was too much work. Honestly, to me that sounds like a lie. I mean, isn't it just as much work to go over to the drawer and get your designated cum boxers as it is to just, get a tissue or something? And then you're just sitting there in that stench all day. It's not like he's blind to it either, because he's clearly aware enough that when someone asks, what's that smell? He knows exactly what they're talking about. This definitely wasn't laziness. He enjoyed that shit. Nevertheless, he thought that Kraylon and his cousin were overreacting. But in any case, he was proud of all the attention his cum boxers were getting now. And that's the story of the cum boxers. Yeah, for today's episode of Tales from the Internet, we're gonna look past the cum jar, the cum box. We're gonna be taking a look at some of the lesser known cum artifacts. In Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest, you have to resurrect Dracula by going around the world and collecting his various body parts before putting them together. That's kind of what we're doing here today. We're just going to take a look at various cum artifacts from around the internet. We're making Dracula out of cum. The song Zero by the Smashing Pumpkins begins with the line, "My reflection, dirty mirror, there's no connection to myself." When the owner of the National Wrestling Alliance, Billy Corgan, wrote these lyrics, he probably didn't consider the possibility of staring at yourself in the mirror while jerking off. An act which, if anything, has an uncomfortable level of connection to yourself. Enter a Redditor named White Licorice. White Licorice was a rapper who befriended another rapper in his local scene. Eventually, they would become roommates during college. It was a comfortable enough setup, although, not perfect. He's white. His dad is from Haiti, though. Maybe he's like an eighth black or something? Not sure. We tried to get him to stop saying the N-word, but he refuses. Relatively early in their arrangement, White Licorice would notice a stink in their home, leading him to find out that his roommate had been coming in a box. Which he immediately told him, you gotta cut that shit out. Now I know what you're thinking, and a Redditor named Semen Slayer had the same thought. Is it the Cumbox guy? I didn't know about the Cumbox guy. Based on the details of these stories, I think it was a different guy, and you'll find in this video that it's pretty common for people to enjoy the same artifacts. In any case, White Licorice thinks he's nipped the Cumbox problem in the bud, and the roommate comes to White Licorice and his other roommate with a big announcement. He eventually just told us one night, like, yo, I have this mirror in my room that I've been coming on all year. I think it was a big joke to him. And here's the mirror. Reminds me of when Kevin Malone spilled his chili everywhere. How'd he manage to hide this the whole time? You see, the mirror was placed on the back of the door to his room, which opened to the inside. So whenever they walked into his room, the mirror would be hidden just out of view. They're not quite sure why he did it. Licorice thought maybe it was just a joke, although as another user named Fiji Artesia noted. So for an entire year, he's jizzing on this mirror and thinking, man, this joke is going to be hilarious when my roommates find it in a year. White Licorice would then use all the attention his post was getting to promote his song, I Hate Some Cops. So I got a couple of desk artifacts over here, one of which is kinda lost media. But let's start with the first. In a thread on Ask Reddit, bosses of Reddit, what's the craziest thing an employee has done while at work? Did you fire him/her? Shit just got shitty ways in. An employee constantly masturbated in his cubicle under his desk. The reason I say constantly is because when he was actually caught by a female employee and reported, another boss went to look at his cubicle. What he found was absolutely appalling. So the boss thinks, you know what? I'm gonna go look for the cum. Normally you'd probably just assume this guy who's jerking off at work would clean up after himself, if anything, to just not get caught. But I guess the boss had a hunch, so he's wearing his nice business suit, gets down on his knees to look for cum, and sure enough, he confirms his suspicions. Under his desk, there was cum everywhere. The guy always shot his gentleman's relish right under his desk so that it would hit the wood. He worked there for over 10 years. The dick spit was so thick after all the countless times of ejaculation, parts of it were black and growing mold. He covered the smell by always having some type of air freshener going. See, that's what all these other guys should have thought of. We should have taken the hint sooner. In the end, he was fired. Come desk number 2. Neroxella was splitting a dorm room in college. He posts to r/WTF. Found this in my roommate's drawer. Big, smiley, flat face with big eyes. He's not quite sure what it's supposed to be, but the consensus is, yeah, that's cum. And based on what I've seen in the course of doing this channel, I'm like 99% sure that's cum. But Neroxella isn't quite sure and adds a few details. I still have no idea what this is, but I will make a follow-up post. I really hope it isn't what you all think it is. I wasn't really in the room with him that much since I spent most of my time at my girlfriend's dorm, but all I know is that whenever I was there, he was playing LOL, yelling in Russian, and eating in Chinese. The update soon comes with more images of the whole room and the surrounding area. Curiously, he notes that there was no smell, which clearly is a point against it being cum, but maybe the guy just had a very clean diet or something. Although one person suggests it could have been chewing tobacco spit. Perhaps the most haunting suggestion was by Null Painter. Dude, I think I just figure out what's going on here, and I don't think OP is going to like it. Maybe someone else already has said this, but given the position of the stain, the spread and direction of the layers, and that he'd have a hell of a hard time sitting down and getting it to arc like that. Your roommate was standing up whenever he unloaded inside his desk, downward and inward into the drawer. His desk faces your bed. He may have been watching you sleep while he did this, apparently every night since he first moved in. Still, Neroxella was not convinced of what this actually was. And by now, the roommate was long gone. What do you guys think it is? I think it's cum. And now, cum desk the third. Redditor Crippled Kraut worked with an oil and gas engineer that in his opinion was getting paid way too much for what they were actually doing, which as he recalls was mostly just hanging out in his office with his wife. He noted that his office, which was a bit far away from everyone else's, did have a bit of a smell to it, but he chalked that up to the fact that he ate a lot of Indian food. Then one day, this guy gets fired. They're cleaning out his office, and this is what they find underneath his desk. A bunch of high-impact splatters there. It all looks kinda recent though, so either this was a new habit or maybe this guy actually cleaned up after himself occasionally. And finally, cum desk the fourth, the lost cum desk. All that seems to remain of this one is a single post on r/Reddit's Museum of Filth. Guy comes on his work desk for years, which goes to a post on a now banned subreddit, Jackoff Confessions. Unfortunately, this thread isn't archived, so we can only piece things together from people's reactions in the Museum of Filth thread, with a few saying that this picture almost made them throw up. We also have a piece of how the original poster explained the smell, reposted by Google Earthlings. Believe it or not, I wasn't the only eccentric person in the office. It very well may have smelled had it not been for three factors. My boss, the owner, had no sense of smell as he lost it all after suffering a concussion. He also had a nasty habit of smoking in the office and relentlessly burning sage, and the office already smelled of mold because of a water leak from the floor above our office. The leak nearly killed the server I built, not to mention the dodgy electrical work. He also mentioned something to the effect of he jerked off at work because he didn't have a dad or something like that, but that's about all we know about the fourth desk. Rav Mysterin visits r/MakeMeSuffer with a special treat. I have a feeling you guys are gonna like this. This is the difference between a normal gray sock and my 5-year-old cum plus tonsil stone sock. And you can see the comparison here with the cum sock having a classic burnt pizza crust look. And I realize some of you may be unaware of what a tonsil stone is. Tonsil stones, more scientifically called tonsilloliths, are these lumps of waste that form in your tonsils when you're sick. Some people get them all the time, some people never get them, but they always smell absolutely vile. So just imagine all the other artifacts in this video and magnify the smell by 100. As he described it, it smelled like a corpse's asshole, and he has to wash his hands several times after using it. Unless, he just uses gloves, which he did some of the time. He never really explained why he was shooting tonsil stones into the same sock he nutted into, but he did explain the general concept. My idea was that if I ever got a girlfriend, I've realized at this point that I probably won't, I will give this thing a Viking funeral with the boat and everything. It's basically my virginity horcrux. Shirts are a pretty obvious one. I mean, they're always just kind of around. And sure enough, there's plenty of these. For example, you have this one user on 4chan who identified himself as Kara. He'd been using a pair of shirts as cum rags for the past 3 years until one day, he accidentally left them out and his mother found them. She demanded that he throw them out, which he did immediately, but then at night he took them back in to take some pictures. I had to wait until nightfall to take them out of the trash can since the neighbors don't like it when I take stuff out of the trash can. Apparently it's a thing he does with some regularity. Even though he was sad to see them go, he said it was also kind of a good thing since he had been thinking about trying a nofap. I guess he felt like he needed the shirts to get started. There's a few other of these that turn up from time to time, like this one attributed to someone named Hale KC that kinda looks like it's forming scabs. But probably the greatest cum shirt story comes from Finland. In February of 2015, a user of the Finnish image board Ilata posted a shirt that he had allegedly used for 8 to 9 years for what he had estimated to be about 4,500 loads. Other posters had ideas for what he could do with it, like cutting a piece of the shirt off and making tea out of it. Ultimately, what he would wind up doing is scraping some of it off and snorting a line of it. I feel like I could convince esoteric health Twitter that scraping off your old dried cum, making it a powder and snorting it could give you some kind of alpha male powers. Of course, the Finnish poster didn't describe any of that effect. He just said it burned his nose and tasted like snot. And those are today's cum artifacts. There's definitely a lot more where that came from, so stay tuned for more of these. Skin is not a solid substance. It is made up of cells and layers. If you press the skin down with enough weight, the fibers of fabric can become entwined in the skin. This doesn't happen with every fiber or every boundary of skin cells, but it can happen enough that it appears that the two are intertwined. This is especially true if the weight, pressure on the skin exists over an extended period of time. This is what journalist Seaglue wrote in the Mysteries Unsolved blog to describe what happened to Gail Grimes, a 480-pound woman from Florida. In 2004, Gail was found in her home with her flesh literally fused to the fabric of her couch, leading to a several-hour-long rescue attempt. An attempt that was ultimately unsuccessful. And although this disturbing situation is a bit unusual, it's far from one of a kind. So today, let's take a look at some people whose skin literally fused to their seats. In my old videos, people used to always ask me why I was standing at my desk. I had a standing desk set up because I was very concerned about correcting my posture. And then later on, studies came out that sitting too many hours a day can lead to cancer, diabetes, heart disease, and that's even if you're otherwise fit and active. Of course, now I'm sitting at this desk because I don't feel like standing anymore, but that's neither here nor there. The stories I'm going to tell you about today, it takes a lot more than a few hours a day to get to that point. Like, so long that you have to wonder how it's even physically possible. Let's start with the story of Gail Laverne Grimes. A tragic tale by all accounts. On August 10th of 2004, Gail's brother Clifford called 911 reporting that Gail had emphysema and she was struggling to breathe. The rescue workers were absolutely not prepared for what they'd see when they arrived. The Martin County Sheriff Sergeant Janelle Atlas told the Palm Beach Post, "We are used to going to people's houses when things are at their worst. And that's fine. We're trained for it. But there is no warning for something like this." The first thing that hit them was the smell. It was so bad that they needed extra safety gear and air hoses to take out the bad air and put in some good air. And when they got inside, there was garbage all over the floors. Furniture was knocked down and pictures have fallen from the wall and clearly laid there for a very long time. Worst of all, every surface, the walls, the floors, everything, was caked in feces. Layers upon layers of old, dried feces. And then they discovered Gail. Seated in her couch, the 39-year-old woman was 480 pounds at only 4'10". They tried to get her up from the couch, but she was in excruciating pain that worsened every time they tried to move her. According to the man who lived with her and claimed to be her husband, Herman Thomas, Gail had apparently been seated in that position for 6 years straight. He tearfully claimed that he'd tried to pull her off, but she just didn't want to leave. And even if she would let him, he probably couldn't have. You see, over the course of those 6 years, her skin had become fused to the material of the couch, and the rescue workers weren't having much more luck moving her themselves. So they decided that they would have to bring her to the hospital with the couch still attached to have it surgically removed. And then the construction begins. You see, there's just no way that you're going to get a woman that size with an entire couch stuck to her onto a normal stretcher. So they set up shop outside her house and with hammers and chainsaws built a larger wooden stretcher. And after trying a bunch of different approaches to get her out, they soon learned that they can't get her outside. They had to remove her patio doors to create a 6-foot opening larger enough to get her out. Of course, she also wouldn't fit in the ambulance, so they had to load her onto a trailer attached to a pickup truck. And then finally they begin driving to the hospital at 2 a.m., 6 hours after the rescue attempt began. And while this is all going on, the neighbors start to gather and watch. In all these years, they had no idea that a woman lived there. They thought it was just the old man by himself, and occasionally they would see some young girls. Those being Gail's nieces that she was supposed to be taking care of after her sister died. Unfortunately, all this effort was for naught, as Gail would die an hour later. Still attached to the couch, with her official cause of death listed as morbid obesity. The sheriff's office commented, "Sheriff's investigators questioned how Grimes lived in such conditions without more help from family or authorities. We're not treating her death as suspicious at this point, but we do have an investigation started because the circumstances surrounding her death are so unusual. In these cases, there's often a question of who's responsible, or if there's cause for anyone to be held accountable at all. And there's a lot of factors that can make it difficult to judge. For example, you also have the story of the woman who was found stuck to a toilet seat. In February of 2008, Corey McFarren called 911 where he's connected to the Ness County Sheriff's Office in western Kansas. He told them that they had to come to his home because something was wrong with his girlfriend. When rescue workers arrived, they're hit with what Sheriff Brian Whipple described as an overpowering smell. It's permeating throughout the whole house, getting more and more intense as they get closer to the bathroom where they ultimately found his girlfriend, Pam Babcock. She's sitting on the toilet where she'd apparently been 2 years straight. I've seen a lot of people have some kind of perma-toilet as part of their dream gaming setup, but there was no gaming going on here. It was just all bathroom living all the time. How does one survive in a bathroom for 2 years? Corey said that he would bring her food and water, and every day he'd ask her to come out of the bathroom and she would say, maybe tomorrow. Over the course of these 2 years, open sores had formed, and these sores caused her skin to actually grow around the toilet seat. And even in these conditions, when they showed up, she insisted that she was fine and didn't need help. She was refusing to leave the bathroom, let alone go to the hospital. But thankfully, after a long back and forth, the rescue workers were finally able to convince her to go. But of course, now she's stuck to the toilet seat and they can't just bring the whole toilet. So they had to get a pry bar and remove the seat from the toilet with her attached to it. And then they brought her to the hospital where the seat was surgically removed from her. Due to nerve damage from an infection in her legs, doctors reported that she would probably never walk again. And the focus then shifted to her boyfriend Corey as investigators were trying to figure out whether or not he had actually committed a crime here. In particular, they were concerned with why he waited so long to call 911. His explanation was this was a situation that came on gradually and got worse over time. They had been dating at that point for 16 years. And Pam had a traumatic childhood. Her mother died at an early age, and she was severely beaten growing up. A neighbor who had known her since childhood said that she was rarely allowed to leave the house. And eventually this leaves her with a fear of going outside, that eventually manifests in her not even wanting to leave the bathroom. Corey explained how it happened. The 36-year-old antique store worker insists the odd arrangement simply evolved over time, and it got to the point where he no longer thought of it as strange. It kind of just happened one day. She went in and had been in there a little while. The next time it was a little longer. Then she got it in her head she was going to stay, like it was a safe place for her, he outlines. At first she was still bathing, changing her clothes, eating food, even having normal, full conversations with Corey. At least as normal as only having conversations with someone in the bathroom can be. It was only a month before the call that the situation worsened. That was when she would not get up from the toilet at all. What ultimately prompted Corey's call was that a day prior she had become what was described as listless and groggy, likely due to the infection. Despite the staff noting that neither Corey nor Pam seemed mentally well, and despite Pam insisting that this wasn't Corey's fault, Corey was charged with mistreatment of a dependent adult, and after pleading no contest, he was given 6 months on probation. That wasn't the worst of it though. You see, Corey had another unrelated court appearance that same day, in which he was given 6 months of jail time for exposing himself to their neighbor. The next story is perhaps one of the most infamous Reddit tales. Actually, the story that inspired me to go down this whole rabbit hole to begin with. In August of 2012, Bonsai Panda, who you might remember as the nurse behind the Swamps of Dagobah story, creates an Ask Me Anything thread because there's a lot of demand to see what else she's seen. In the thread, a user named JQ Public doesn't have a question, but her story reminded him of something. JQ wasn't a nurse, but he worked for an emergency mental health unit. In general, most of his work had to do with domestic disputes and preventing self-harm. One night, he receives a call from someone who had a friend that knew this guy that other people were worried about. He asks his routine questions about self-harm and whether or not the person in question is willing to see them. But they weren't really getting the information they needed as the guy on the phone seemed a bit confused, perhaps a bit drunk himself. The person of concern was a long-term alcoholic, and the friend was a person who had been going shopping for him, mostly for beer. Originally, they weren't going to go as there was no threat of immediate self-harm. Even though the "my girlfriend's crazy" types wanted us to be the mental health police, we were quite clear on the need for the client to agree to speak with us. Something about the call was troubling him though, so after discussing it with his partner, they decided they're just going to go to the house and give the door a knock, and they could see if the man was willing to talk to them. By the time they get there, they find that the police and the EMTs are already on the scene. They go up to them to find out what's going on, but the conversation is interrupted by, once again, the smell. The original caller, oh my god, what a surprise, was not actually the friend of a friend who knows a guy who, etc., but the person who'd been buying the beer for our client, whom we still have not seen. As we are standing outside this guy's house getting background information, the wind shifts slightly. The house is close to an abattoir, so I didn't think too much of it at first, until I noticed the cops and paramedics quickly move away from the front of the house we're supposed to be going into. The beer buyer turns a little gray, and his support team quickly fade. He's gone right afterwards. The paramedics are getting ready to go in by slapping on 2 layers of medical gloves and smearing something that looks like Vicks VapoRub on their upper lips. I grew up on a farm and have had to deal with some pretty sticky things, so I figured I'd be okay. Let me tell you though, that Vicks VapoRub. One time my bad Jinx was playing this venue where the septic system was leaking out into the walls, and it stunk. We kept some Vicks VapoRub by the merch table, and it really does come in handy. Still, it wasn't enough for JQ Public's partner, who refused to go inside. Finally, he knocks on the door and hears a voice very weakly say, "Come in." At this point, he gets some more background to what had been going on. The old man in the building had been an alcoholic for 30 years, and the past year had been extra bad. His neighbor, who was the caller, had been getting him groceries and beer for this whole time, and was feeling guilty for enabling him, as well as lying about how much beer costs and pocketing the difference. The kitchen is full of a year's worth of uneaten groceries. He notes that some of the grocery bags were moving. They're all rotting and the bugs are having themselves a feast. He sees the back of the old man's head, seated on the couch next to a pile of empty beer bottles that go higher than the couch. And he realized from the shape of the pile that gradually the guy had probably shifted from one side of the couch to the other. The entire bathroom was clogged and full of rotting shit. And between the bathroom and the couch, there is what he described as not a line, but a pathway of shit. Of course, the couch is also completely caked in it. Dry shit, but if Dexter had been around and had been more into shit than blood, he would have loved that couch. Splatter patterns everywhere, including, as I realized once my eyes had adjusted to the light in the room, over top of the bottles. The man is in a daze staring at the TV, completely oblivious to the strangers in his house standing around him. But his gaze is broken after a cop turns the TV off. And then JQ Public is able to ask him the normal questions he asked about the guy's mental health. But it's going nowhere as the guy is clearly just not there. So he has to go outside and discuss with the team what to do next. One of the cops asked, "Do you think there's a possibility of a medical emergency here?" Which, the answer to that question is so obvious that everyone starts laughing a bit. But it's one of those things that they legally have to do to be able to bring the guy to the hospital. And then it happens, and be warned, this is some of the most gross text ever put to Reddit. And now the payoff. The old guy's been in that one spot long enough that his shit and piss have more or less melted the fabric and foam he's been sitting on, and his clothing, skin, ass, back, and thigh flesh have all necrotized, and the rot from that has mixed in with the couch so that it's hard to tell which is which. There were chunks of bone visible, long strips of rotting flesh and colors I hope to never see again. The smell of it. One of the paras had a spray can in his hand, and the second the old man got up, he sprayed the couch, not the client, which stopped us from vomiting all over the patient. We lay him face down on the gurney, or whatever it's properly called. They tossed some gauze over his ass and wheeled him out of there. They didn't even try to separate what was man from what was couch bits. The paramedics figured he'd been sitting there at least a month or so. The cops were still outside trying to figure out what they should be doing, and the only thing I could think of was for them to lock up. They did. We left, and I never found out if the client survived or not. But I don't think I'll forget the smell or the sight of what was left of him. The worst of all of it, the look in his eyes when I asked him if he understood why we were here. Hollow, dead flat eyes with someone screaming behind them. That, and my partner telling me I stunk up the van as we drove back. I have no idea how that man could still be alive when he stood up. It looked like half of him had simply rotted off. It's a story that's been recounted time and time again on Reddit. And in some of these posts, other Redditors chimed in with similar stories. Like you have Mr. Poopy Butthole, who wrote of a 600-pound man in his hometown who had grown to his recliner. He died a week after being separated from it, and supposedly being melted to the chair kept him alive. Separating him from it ultimately led to his death. And you have the rowing maniac who writes of how his own brother was going down the same path, despite their father's work involved in cleaning up these sorts of situations. But thankfully he had been taking better care of himself lately. Perhaps the most tragic of all the stories I'd seen looking into this topic, though, is the story of Lacey Fletcher. On January 3rd of 2022, Lacey Fletcher's parents, Clay and Sheila, called 911. They reported that their daughter Lacey wasn't breathing. Rescue workers arrived once again to that textbook stench. Once they got inside, they discovered the 36-year-old Lacey Fletcher dead. Her body fused to her family's couch. She had weighed only 96 pounds and was covered in sores, some of them down to the bone, and infested with maggots. Old human waste was stuck all over her body, including her face. It was said that she had not been outside of their home in 15 years. And a lot of people had no idea that her parents even had a daughter. And people who did know her when she was a child just assumed she grew up and moved away. Initially, it was reported that Lacey suffered from something called locked-in syndrome. Locked-in syndrome is a condition in which all of your voluntary muscles, except the ones that control your eyes, are paralyzed. But mentally, you're still completely there. Essentially, you're a prisoner in your own body. So it appears at first that you have Lacey enduring over a decade of abuse and neglect by her parents. All the while, she's completely conscious of it and unable to do anything about it. But the coroner who ruled the death a homicide disagreed. I don't know where that term came from or what source it came from. In all my years as a practicing physician, I have never heard of that term. The only diagnoses that I know she did have was first, social anxiety, severe autism, and that's it. Those are her only two diagnoses. It is a little strange considering locked-in syndrome is something that, while it's rare, it is a real thing that's recognized. But in any case, the evidence does point to the fact that she didn't have locked-in syndrome. In particular, the feces and couch foam that were found in her stomach, which she would not have been able to swallow had she had that syndrome. So how do things get to this point for a girl who's remembered as extremely intelligent and her parents who are thought to be kind-hearted, selfless pillars of the community? As the parents tell it, it's shockingly similar to the toilet bowl story I talked about before. It began around 9th grade. Lacey begins to have severe social anxiety and she's diagnosed with autism. It's decided that homeschooling would be best for her. She would still leave the house at that point. Neighbors mentioned they would always see her outside working out. And at some point in 2000, she began working with a psychiatrist to deal with social issues. But by 2010 or so, she began to refuse to leave the couch. Her parents had spoken to a psychiatrist about what to do about this, and he told them that they had to bring her to a hospital to be evaluated. But they never brought her to the hospital. Instead, they simply began to accommodate this behavior. They would bring her meals to the couch, and they would bring her towels to use instead of the toilet, because she wouldn't even get up to go to the bathroom. But in their minds, she was capable of making these kinds of decisions for herself. They were so convinced that they were doing the right thing that they were the ones who called 911 thinking there wouldn't be consequences for them. Actually, while I was working on this video, I saw Dr. Todd Grande put out a video on this case, going in depth into what might have been going on mentally there and what possible motives might have been. Definitely worth looking at if you want to look more into the psychological aspect of this story. In any case, the parents were brought up on murder charges. But the case was thrown out because of a technical issue. This past June, however, though, they were arrested again and indicted. And as of me recording this video, they're out on bond and awaiting trial. I think when you hear of stories like this in passing where someone died of sitting too long, so long that their bodies literally fused with the chairs they're sitting in, I think the initial assumption before you look into the stories is like, oh, this person's lazy and sloppy. They let it happen to themselves. But when you really look at them, it seems like almost every single one of these cases, it's a sad story of a person with severe mental issues and their support system failing them. But at the same time, if you're a person around this, it's difficult to figure out what to do. And perhaps it's surprisingly easy to convince yourself that there isn't a problem until it's too big to ignore. And by then, it's too late. This guy's wife ate his poop. It's a tale as old as time. A married couple struggling to keep up the excitement as the years pass. And after having a child, the need to spice things up gets even more pressing. For some couples, this can mean things like trying out new positions, a little bit of role-playing, some toys. This was not the case for one 28-year-old Redditor, who very quickly found himself well beyond his comfort zone. For this episode of Tales from the Internet, let's talk about a couple who had their marriage ruined by turds. Normally, when a relationship hits a speed bump, you might want to reach out to friends and family for a little bit of advice. Even if you generally have things put together pretty well, sometimes it just helps to have an outside perspective. But of course, there's some things that you might not want friends and family to be privy to, in which case, Reddit's r/relationship advice might be what you need. Thus, on Friday, November 23rd of 2018, a user named Throwaway Husband account makes the post, "Wife told me she wanted to experiment. I obliged, then she attempted to eat my feces." He begins by saying that he's using a throwaway account because his wife follows his real Reddit account. Which, I mean, something tells me that this situation isn't so common that she would see this and be like, oh, must be some other guy. Especially considering the great amount of detail he winds up going into. He explains that he's been married to his wife for 3 years and the whole time they've been having pretty vanilla sex. And after they had a kid, things really slowed down. So after having the kid, the wife starts hanging out with this group of moms from the neighborhood, and she expresses these same concerns to her friends. One of the moms pipes up and tells her the secret that saved her marriage. Pegging her husband, which pegging, of course, if you don't know what that is, for some reason I feel like a good chunk of the people who watch this channel for some reason might know what it is. I don't know. But for those of you who don't, it's the act of the woman straps on a makeshift little, I guess a big little, a makeshift wiener. Personally, I never got the appeal of it. I mean, it's not like this thing has nerve endings for the woman to feel good with it. It's just, I guess it's some kind of a power dynamic thing. But it worked for her friend, so she wants to try it. OP, of course, was hesitant to try it. He'd said he'd never done ass play of any kind. And as he puts it, he's always thought of the anus as solely an exit. But you know, he wants to make his wife happy, so he goes along with it. And surprisingly, it actually works out okay. That next weekend, she pegged me and everything was surprisingly enjoyable. Additionally, the week following the pegging was one of the best weeks we've had together since the birth of our child. We were back to our old sex life, doing things like having sex before work and even waking each other up with head. But then the week after, she wants to peg him again. It seems like he was surprised that this wasn't just a one-time thing, which I mean, come on man, she's gotta replenish her pegging meter. Well, he agrees to it, and this time, things get a little bit more intense. This is when things took an extreme turn. During the second pegging, while my wife was inside of me, she grabbed my hair. I know that there's no indication whether she does, the old hair twist, which you kind of got to do for optimal control. She grabbed my hair, craned my neck to the right, and pressed our foreheads together. I had never seen her take control like this and thought it was very hot until she looked me in the eye and whispered, "I want your shit." I can't help but picture her saying it like the sick animation Red Diamond Dragon Club.
I'm hungry for shit.
He's taken aback by this, so she elaborates. She wants him to shit on her. He pushes her off of him, asks if she's joking, and to which she starts crying. And because of this, he starts to feel bad, thinking he's king-shaming her or something. But in any case, he just wasn't down with this, and he winds up spending the night at a friend's house. Of course, he doesn't explain to the friend why he's staying there. He just needed to crash. Throughout the week that follows, the only conversations he has with his wife are about their kid. After the whole week passes, he finally confronts her about this whole situation. She told me again that she wanted me to shit on her, and that it meant a lot to her. I thought it was sickening, but she claimed this was her deepest, darkest kink. I couldn't understand how and why my shit excited her, but she insisted that she has always wanted this. It was interesting how pegging wasn't really what she wanted, but it wound up being the gateway to her admitting what it was that she really wanted. You have to wonder how many married people there are out there holding on to this kind of deep, dark secret that's only waiting for the thing that's gonna knock it loose and they finally come clean. I mean, actually, there was a comment on this post left by a Redditor who did a little bit of math. They dug into the known data and concluded that 175 hetero couples likely had engaged in coprophagia this past weekend. Poo eating, of course.
And then they eat the poo-poo.
Which, I mean, if you really think about it, though, that number, it sounds about right. In any case, OP does what any Redditor would do when presented with the prospect of shitting on his wife to make her happy. He starts looking up articles and doing research, getting his hands on all the material he possibly can about poop fetishes, looking at some scat so he can understand. And finally, he comes to the conclusion that, although it literally nauseates him, he'll try it to satisfy her. And then later that week, him and his wife are having normal sex. During the session, he mentions that he has to go take a shit, which of course makes her perk up. She gives him some words of encouragement, and although he really doesn't want to do it, he did make a promise. So they go to the bathroom. She got into the bathtub, and I hung my ass over the side of the tub. I started pushing, but unsurprisingly found it very difficult to successfully shit on my wife. I turned my head around to see my wife staring up and smiling at me, waiting for me to finish. With enough time, I was finally able to get a turd to start coming out. I could hear my wife breathing heavier beneath me as my asshole started opening. However, before the turd was able to drop on her chest, I felt a sensation around my asshole. I turned around and saw my wife, the love of my life, the mother of my son, attempting to catch my turd in her mouth as it fell out of my asshole. I was horrified that she would try to do this, and tried to put the shit back into my body so she couldn't receive it in her mouth. Seeing what looked like an attempt by her to eat my shit brought me close to throwing up. So he clenches and tries to keep it from coming out, but in doing that, he winds up cutting a little piece off, and he hears it drop somewhere below him, and he doesn't even look, he just runs out with seeing whatever it is that his wife did with it. He locks himself in their other bathroom and cleans himself up, the whole time thinking about how he's never gonna be able to look his wife in the face again. She's knocking on the door and he's ignoring it, and eventually she texts him, thanking him for fulfilling her wish, and asking him to come to bed. But at the time of writing it, he had not yet gone. I've been sitting in the living room typing this for the last half hour, scared to face my wife. We have plans to take our son to the zoo with another family tomorrow, but I don't think I can look at her after what she did to me. I feel deceived and violated by the woman I love and trust. During our initial conversations about this, there was never a question that my shit would go anywhere other than her chest. She knew how uncomfortable I was with this in the first place, yet she still tried to push the boundary that we had established. He concludes by asking if anyone else had experienced a similar violation of trust, and that he's concerned that this situation could end their marriage. Now, of course, you've got some people who think this whole thing's a troll post. 10 points for a unique troll post. I wish I was trolling. Which, by the way, that was the only other comment this guy ever left. I do think, though, that with the amount of attention this post got, the sort of person who writes troll posts on Reddit wouldn't be able to help themselves but make a bunch of updates. Of course, these updates never came. Granted, the mods eventually locked this thread and they added a warning that if OP wants to add updates, he needs to contact them first. So perhaps there actually were updates that he wasn't able to post. In any case, this actually does raise an interesting point. On some level, this is a violation of consent. Like, he was clearly uncomfortable with this act to begin with, and then she went and tried to make it something that he had never agreed to. One user, Indelible Moments, directed him to r/BDSM community for advice from more experienced people in this matter. Although another user, Dinos Are Gay Like Me, noted that even there's not a lot of scat people. Although another user, Moy Fry, brought up a good point. Even then, the core aspects of a scene are the core aspects. She violated his trust and took the scene to a level he wasn't ready for. Having the language to talk to her could be what helps repair their relationship. Perhaps my favorite take in the comments, though, the most Reddit-brained thing that I've read in this entire discussion. This is so fucked. I just don't think I could literally shit in someone's mouth and then ever kiss them again. If you ever had a dog, just consider that a lot of dogs eat their own shit then later proceed to lick your face. Yeah, but hopefully your dog is not the mother of your children and you need to regain a sense of sexual normalcy with said dog. Hopefully. This thread is weird enough already. That's a story of the Redditor whose wife greedily stole his poo. I made a short a while back about a girl who had a bit of a gross misadventure with a pool toy. A very stinky misadventure. And a lot of the comments that I got on that post seem to reflect the fact that normally this is something that happens to guys. Often in even more gross and horrifying ways. And they were right. I mean, just look at the coconut story that I covered a while back. But really, that story is just scratching the surface. There's so many more of these. And a lot of them have much more severe consequences. And I warn you, some of the tales in this video are gonna have you uncomfortably crossing your legs. For today's video, let's take a look at some online misadventures with improvised pocket kitties. Before I really get into this video, I just want to talk about how, you know how in the first 15 to 30 seconds of a video, you have to keep it extra G-rated or else YouTube is just gonna bury the video, demonetize and all that crap. So the way I get around it is I gotta come up with euphemisms for things. So I'm like, what's a good euphemism for a fleshlight? And I'm coming up with nothing at first. So I look it up and the things that they're giving me, Alabama egg roll, Fleshkimo brothers. To me that sounds more like if you and your friend are sharing the same one. Probably my favorite one that I saw was Greenpeace Hot Pocket, which to me sounds more like a Hot Pocket that's vegan, and I'm not sure you get what that is technically vegan. In any case, I wasn't really satisfied with any of those, and then I pulled pocket kitties out of my ass. But anyway, here are some stories of homemade toys gone horribly, horribly wrong. Our first story is like something out of Silent Hill. Specifically, Silent Hill 4, if you know what I mean. TIFU by mostly circumcising myself with a drill and a pool noodle. How do you circumcise yourself with a drill? I'm picturing someone, like doing the fork and spaghetti type deal. Anyway, this is a throwaway account because his friends know his real Reddit account. He talks about the birthday he had the year before making this post. This was a depressing birthday for him as he had nobody to spend it with. All of his friends were too busy to do anything, and that experience made him officially feel like he had reached adulthood. He had also been single for about a year, so he was feeling particularly lonely. So he decides that he's gonna celebrate this birthday by himself with what he describes as an extra special masturbation experience. Starts to look around his house for ideas. It makes me think about how back in the day, people used to wind up on this website called Jackin' World. It's actually still there in its original form, that beautiful 90s web design. This site would have you come up with all kinds of crazy contraptions, like things with sandwich bags, couches, banana peels. But this guy didn't have that, he just MacGyvered something up on his own, tinkering in his basement like a little Thomas Edison. Here's what he comes up with. He cuts off a section from an old pool noodle. I have no idea why this always comes back to the pool toys. Stuffs the noodle with a microfiber cloth, and using a needle and thread, he winds up fixing it to the inside of the pool noodle. He then lubes up the inside, puts on a condom, as he says for extra smoothness, and he just goes to town. The idea of using a cloth, any cloth, even a microfiber cloth, sounds like a terrible idea, but that wasn't a problem. He said it was actually really good. But then as he's finishing up his special experience, he notices, at the other side of his apartment, his power drill. I guess on some level, I can understand the compulsion to want to use it. I mean, you get that, like, that little, like, twisty motion, right? But you would never in a million years see me put my junk next to anything that could generate that sort of power. But I guess this guy was just braver than I am. So what he does is he puts toilet paper in one end of the tube, shoves the paper into the drill chuck, and then puts the pool noodle back onto himself. It starts spinning, and he says it feels amazing. But it felt a little too good. So good that he kinda loses himself in the moment. And as he starts nutting, he pushes himself further into the tube. Feels fine, but then as he pulls back, he notices that he's stuck in the drill chuck. Specifically, his foreskin is caught in there. He takes his finger off the trigger immediately and tries to get it out, but it's stuck. And while he's trying to free himself from the drill, he's still getting those, like, you know, those, like, little, like, aftershock nut putters. So he's trapped in the drill and still nutting, very reluctantly, as he puts it. He compares it to if you had finished watching your favorite video and then all of a sudden it switches to Ron Jeremy. And then he describes his mission to save his foreskin. I could feel that my foreskin was still somewhat attached, and I didn't want that to change. So I put on my baggiest pair of pants. That's why you should always have a pair of Jenkos ready. I put on my baggiest pair of pants and drove to Emerge. I told them exactly what happened in front of a young woman, family of 5, and an old Indian couple. It was definitely the most embarrassing experience of my life. Although he doesn't remember much of it, he says that the surgery was a success. He just couldn't touch himself for a few weeks, and that wound up being the worst birthday of his life. You got people in the comments asking him to show the surgery scar, but he's afraid that in the future someone might see his dick and then recognize him from the Reddit post. Of course, this being Reddit also leads to a massive discourse about circumcision. You got a guy in there who's actively trying to regrow his foreskin by stretching it. You got a guy in there that's adamant that it's better to be circumcised, and it gets a little heated in the thread. But ultimately, the poster was satisfied in his decision to keep his. Our next story also involves foreskin destruction. C. Bugger writes, TIFU by ripping my foreskin apart with a ceiling fan. I just immediately get this image in my head of, do you remember that episode of The Simpsons where Bart steals Grandpa's dentures and he puts them in his mouth and bites onto the ceiling fan and swings around? I'm just imagining that with this guy in his foreskin. Although, you know, he would have had to be a really little guy for it to not pull it out of the ceiling. He begins by saying that this story took place 20 years ago when he was 16. This, of course, was before he was online, so he had to get a little creative sometimes. One day, his mother goes to the store, and that's when he comes up with his invention. He takes a toilet paper roll, fills it with wet toilet paper, and then duct tapes it to his wiener. I had to reread it several times to make sure that he said he taped it to his wiener and not just, you know, to itself. Because there's just no way that anyone who has ever felt duct tape would have ever made that decision. But that's not even where the main problem comes in. After he makes sure that the roll is really tight, he makes a rope out of more duct tape and wraps it around one of the blades of the ceiling fan. At this point, the way he's describing it, it sounds like he's just gonna rip his whole damn dick off. Like, this sounds like a deleted Mortal Kombat fatality. But in his mind, here's what's going to happen. When he sits on one side of the ceiling fan, the spinning motion is going to pull and release the tube as it gets closer and further away, thus creating some kind of up and down motion. I've played The Incredible Machine enough to know that the physics don't always work how you think they're gonna work. And this certainly did not work how he thought it was going to work. All starts well as I sit on a desk chair below the fan. A bit slow, but working, so I turn it up. I start to notice that since there is no swivel, the duct tape is twisting and shortening. It's pulling violently on my pubes and skin. I can't get the fucking thing off. I stand up to buy myself time, shut off the fan, pull the string and wait. Oh fuck, still going. I'm on my tippy toes and my pubes are ripping. I pull the string and the fan begins to slow, but it's still twisting. I slam my hand into the fan to stop it. The fan breaks out of the ceiling, but I'm free. He removes himself from the device and finds that he's now got a fistful of pubes. And he discovers that he had basically given himself a penile Indian burn. with tears in his foreskin and spots of blood. And his head is a color that he describes as ghostly gray, a color that gradually transforms into purple over the course of the next day. And then all of his skin would molt over the course of the next 3 weeks. To this day, he says he still has a long white scar down his shaft that has no feeling. And yet now, at the age of 36, he says that he thinks the idea still has potential. It all would have worked if he had a swivel. But I mean, there's no need. I feel like we've gotten beyond that technologically now. I mean, the Chinese invented that suck machine. There's a proper name for it, but it's the suck machine. Our last story comes from Catatree Does Games, simply entitled, My Fleshlight Horror Story. Like the story before, this disaster was born out of a need to get off extra good without his parents knowing. But unlike the previous stories, this guy grew up with the internet, so he had access to advanced knowledge. Specifically, his friends sent him schematics for a homemade fleshlight. He goes on to explain to the readers what a fleshlight is, as if anybody reading this story wouldn't know. But he then says that he assumes everyone reading this knows about the 2 sponges, rubber glove, and cup method. I'm stumped. 2 sponges, rubber glove, and cup. Okay, that makes sense. Mr. Bean did not say that. In any case, Catatree, a self-described clever guy, wants to level this up a bit. He takes a brick of memory foam, drills a hole into it, then stuffs it with a kitchen glove, and he tightens this device at key points with rubber bands to create a variety of experiences. Then he secures the whole thing with duct tape to a mason jar. What he's describing here, it almost sounds like one of those Tenga devices with different pressure points and little doodad. And he said the experience with this thing was mind-blowing. So good that he used it for 6 months straight, at least 2 days a week, sometimes 3. Every time he used it, he'd fill it with lotion. And although he would try not to, sometimes he would nut into it and eventually just stop caring and did it every time. But he thought it was okay because, it all disappeared every time he did it. I hope you understand. Matter can neither be created nor destroyed. Eventually, though, he starts getting bored of it, starts using it less, and eventually forgets about it entirely. He puts it away in a small chest in the back of his shelf, where it stays for 3 years. But then one day, he comes home and found that his mom got new furniture, and everything on that shelf was gone, either moved onto his bed or put in a box. That is, everything except for one object. She had taken it out of the chest it was in, maybe just to give me the message that she knew what it was. I was absolutely fucking mortified. I decided that, for whatever reason, I was not going to move the fleshlight anywhere else. I guess I thought that if I didn't acknowledge it, nothing would come of the situation, or at least I would give the impression that I didn't know where it was or that it wasn't a fleshlight at all. But come on, my mom isn't that stupid. But when the furniture guys get there, his mother puts it into the chest and moves it. Crisis averted? Not really. In fact, this might have actually made things worse. The same year, he begins developing some kind of severe chronic breathing problem, but only when he laid down in his room. The symptoms were consistent with some kind of allergy, but he couldn't pinpoint it. He had dogs, but they never bothered him really during most of the day. But whatever it was literally getting so bad that he couldn't sleep at night, and as a consequence, he was exhausted every single day. But with no solution, he just toughed it out for more than a year. And that brings us to 2 weeks before he made this post. He's looking around at his room and he just happens upon Old Reliable. He was pleasantly surprised, like meeting an old friend. Nobody's home, so he thinks, hey, you know what, let's give it another go. By this point, though, he had forgotten his usual routine. 6 years had passed since he had begun using this, and it still looks fine from the outside. He just shoves himself in without any lotion or anything. But despite the lack of lotion, it's wet. He pulls himself out of it and discovers that his member is covered in some kind of black tar. An extremely stinky black tar. This is the Venom origin story that they don't want you to know about. He compared the smell to cheap Chinese takeout that had been left to collect mold over 8 months. Which is such a specific comparison that I feel like he probably had that happen as well. The smell was so bad that he just threw up immediately. Runs to the bathroom and cleans himself off. And now that he's finally clean, there's one thing left to do. You gotta take a look inside. You gotta find out what we're dealing with here. You gotta know the extent of the corruption. So he covers his nose, pulls out the old kitchen glove, and here's what he finds. In The Last of Us, There are times where entire walls will be covered in a thick pink growth of spores and fungal material. I shit you not when I say that it looked identical to what I saw on the inside of that glove. What was obvious to me now that, for whatever reason, was not obvious in 8th grade was that after using a fleshlight, the 3 pumps of lotion and cum you dump in it does not just disappear. It stays there. Pushed deeply into each of the 5 fingers of this glove was a thick black and white spotted mud, which, I'm not joking about this, had eaten 100 or so tiny holes through the glove. Turning it inside out and running it under the tap, the water turned dark brown as I washed the 6 years of moldy cum off my poor mother's kitchen glove. The smell did not leave my bedroom nor the bathroom for 2 days. My mother had made a comment about it upon coming home. I don't think she knew what it was. Obviously, I decided to throw the glove in the trash, which I hid in the very bottom of our trash can. 3 days after he got rid of this glove, his breathing problems disappeared. The man was dying of cum poisoning. But I feel that anyone who's watched this channel before, you knew exactly where this was going as soon as he said the lotion and cum disappeared. Gambling has a way of just making everything a little bit more interesting. I'm not only talking about the odd game of poker or blackjack either. Like personally, I'm not the biggest sports fan, but if I got a little something riding on the game, maybe I can be. Same goes for politics. I mean, who hasn't made a buck or two betting on the elections? And when it's stuff you actually do like already, forget about it. Like say, the TV show Breaking Bad. And you know what? Money gets boring sometimes. What if, instead of gambling with money, you gambled with piss? For today's episode of Tales from the Internet, let's take a look at the guy who drank his own pee because of Breaking Bad. Now, before I get into the actual story, there's a bit of background I have to explain from Breaking Bad. So if you haven't seen the show yet, the spoilers ahead. The 4th season focuses on the power struggle between Walt and Gus Fring. It becomes a dangerous game as Walt fights to survive. Jesse is given the task of poisoning their boss using a ricin-filled cigarette, yet he hesitates when Gus shows favoritism towards him. This causes a rift between the previously loyal partners. And with his closest ally gone, everything seems hopeless. But then, Jesse's girlfriend calls him in a panic. Her son, Brock, has been hospitalized with a serious illness. Jesse realizes that the ricin cigarette is missing. He suspects that Walt is behind this and confronts him at gunpoint. However, Walt convinces Jesse of his innocence. He then claims that Gus is the one who framed him for this exact situation. They then conspire together to eliminate the ruthless kingpin. This is where viewers were left to hang when the episode End Times aired on October 2nd, 2011. And with a single episode left in the season, there was fervent debate over what would happen next. The most heated debate centered around whether or not Walt actually did poison Brock. That was the case with the thread posted to the Breaking Bad subreddit. After rewatching episode 12, I am convinced that Walt poisoned Brock. The OP points out several scenes, including one in which Walt stares at a poisonous plant. While most just discussed the actual theory, a post from a user named Paging Craig stood out. If Walt did it, I'll drink my own piss. Immediately, people took him up on this offer. Can I hold you to this? This will be brought up again if you don't. Now, it wouldn't be right without fair stakes. Thankfully, a user named Frank Reynolds stepped up to the bat. This meant that either way, someone was drinking piss. Shortly after, a thread was created to discuss the competition, and they attempted to ensure that the outcome couldn't be faked. There will be urine consumption. I vote that whoever loses must post a video. In said video, you will pee into a cup of sorts and drink it all in one take. No cuts in between. I love the internet. The problem is, you can use apple juice or something similar and we would be none the wiser. What if he uses a fake dick? Test the pH levels. It's unclear if Craig knew his declaration would be taken so seriously, but the pressure mounted as the moderators backed the bet. The subreddit is going to require a video of your comeuppance, should you be proven wrong. Another commented, I will go on record saying that the r/Breaking Bad mods fully support this ridiculous contest. This affirmed that if they didn't follow through, they would be banned. Of course, that didn't really mean much in the grand scheme of things. Realistically, if one of them backed out and got banned, they could just make a new account to post on, and in any case, nobody would really remember in a week or so. Yet the two parties were insistent on their wager. Frank replied that he was a man of his word. However, he stipulated that his man bits wouldn't be seen as he had learned that lesson already. Which I feel like that's kind of a lesson you can only learn once, because past that everyone's just like, Dick is old news, buddy, nobody cares anymore. In any case, this sparked some controversy as people felt that they couldn't be sure unless his genitals were in the frame. How will people be sure it's actual pee and not one of those urinator systems with the clamp and the tube hidden? In response, a user questioned if they'd feel differently if one of them were a girl. They then suggested they turn their back just enough to see both the stream and the cup, and these questions led them to follow Craig into other subreddits. He was asked about specifics in a completely different community. Hey, are you going to actually piss into a cup then drink it on video? So we're going to see the production of urine and the drinking part? You don't think you're going to vomit after doing it, or that the video will go viral? He replied bluntly, I don't know. It depends on what happens on Sunday. Later he clarified that he'd pee into the glass on camera. Strangely enough, all this attention led to a third person to join in. I am willing to drink my own piss if Walt didn't do it as well. Screen cap away, gentlemen. It won't be an epic switch like Hale did either. He pointed to his history of following up on bets on Reddit. When the Pats scored 34 against the Colts, he posted a picture of himself in drag. Honestly, considering that we already had two sides of the bet accounted for, I feel like this guy just wanted an excuse to drink his pee in public. But now with 3 different individuals offering to ingest urine for the cause, the stakes were rising. There was a concern they could get out of it using semantics. The loser is going to pull a semantic out, like Walt didn't actually do it, Saul did it on Walt's order, or he poisoned him with ricin, not the plant claimed in the post. Frank disputed this by broadening the terms right then and there, but most just continued to debate Walt's innocence. It's honestly kind of interesting to look back on what they thought at the time. I honestly do not think Walt did it. It's one of the more ridiculous fad conspiracy theories. The community was restless, waiting anxiously for answers, and they remained on edge until October 9th, when the finale finally aired. Needless to say, it didn't disappoint. Face Off remains the 3rd highest rated episode of the series to this day. The only 2 above it wouldn't air until a year later. It delivered an intense season-long build-up while executing an iconic villain in perhaps one of the most memorable deaths we'd ever seen on TV before. And in spite of how reprehensible Walt had become, it made you root for him. Yet, as viewers celebrated his victory, the show hit them with a curveball. The final shot cuts to his backyard as the camera slowly pans left. This reveals a lily of the valley plant, which Walt used to poison Brock. Upon this revelation, the subreddit was quickly filled with posts about the bet. They were eager to see if Craig would deliver. The moderator even sent him a message to be read after the finale. Hello, Paging Craig. This is awkward. We need you to up your fluid intake and get your video camera ready. In order to keep your word, you'll be drinking your piss for the enjoyment of strangers on the internet. Bet you didn't see that coming when you thought about what you'd be doing with your life a few years back. Please message the mods and let us know whether you'll be planning on keeping up your side of the bet. We'll move on from there. Hey, at least you'll be internet famous, right? This flood upset a lot of people because it was tied to such an important plot point. The outcome was an immediate spoiler for anyone familiar with the bet. Now, I don't know about you, but if I was trying to avoid spoilers for a TV show that I hadn't watched yet, I would simply not browse the subreddit until I saw it. In any case, I'm willing to bet that whoever was mad about it got over it pretty quickly, given that they weren't expected to chase it with urine. An hour later, Craig returned with an update. He decided to edit his original comment instead of making a new post in order to minimize spoilers. And he would, in fact, deliver. Edit. So as not to spoil anything for anyone on the subreddit, did I have to drink my own piss? Well, since I can't get spoilers to work, I assume people who come here know the outcome. Yes, I did. And Walt is a bastard, lol. Time to eat crow and drink my own piss. Tasted worse than I expected. He then included a link to the video. It's clear that, regardless of losing, he was distraught by the news. The account was named Walt Harms Kids, and the video, Walt is evil, better drink my own piss. It's only a minute long, but I'm not sure if YouTube will let me play the entire thing. The footage begins with Craig showing off a cup. He places it in the middle of his bathtub to minimize spillage, then he starts to pee. It's pretty messy though, I can't tell if he has bad aim or did that on purpose. Maybe he decided he'd poured himself enough. As the stream tapers, Craig bends over and picks up the urine-filled glass. He reflects on his prediction, admitting that he was 100% wrong. Finally, after showing it to the camera one last time, he downs it all in one shot. The community erupted as truly no one knew that he'd actually do it. It was a mixture of both shock and praise that he actually kept his word. But most of all, they were just concerned with how yellow it was. You need to drink more water, son. His piss is yellower than Tuco's pre-walled meth. Ugh. It got to the point that Craig had to explain himself. I drank like a quarter gallon all day to make it dark, so people wouldn't think I just put water in a glass somehow. I mean, props to him. He decided to make the act even nastier just to dispel any doubt. His original comment went on to collect over 1,600 upvotes, and the story eventually escapes the community, being shared on r/bestof. A lot of people seeing it claimed that they were too grossed out to even watch it, while one claimed that they did watch it and vomited. Inevitably, there were accusations of it being fake, despite his best efforts to prove otherwise. I'm not buying it, and I'm surprised people are so quick to believe this video. Nothing like a little yellow Kool-Aid in a squeeze bottle to make the trick complete. But easily, the most insane is this in-depth analysis of the flow of his urine. Of course it's fake. The way he pees is totally unrealistic. It's just full strength without starting weak and building up. Then when he's done, there's no finishing off squirts, which are always required. Who pisses in one single uniform squirt? Lastly, unless he hasn't drunk liquids in 3 days, that shit ain't piss. These weren't popular opinions, but I couldn't not throw in the piss CSI. Paging Craig remained active for the next 4 years, and sometime after, he deleted the account entirely. This could have been out of shame, although the actual video remains up to this day. While it's unclear what he's up to these days, his legacy in the community remains. In 2012, the subreddit held a charity event called Breaking Good. It raised money for A Place Called Home to educate children in LA about gang violence and drug abuse. The organization was chosen by Luis Moncada, one of the Salamanca twins. To encourage donations, a moderator promised to film a sequel to Craig's video. For 9 more days, we are still accepting donations for the Breaking Good event. We are currently at $2,808.43, and if we can reach 3,000, I will pull a Paging Craig and film myself drinking my own piss. No joke. The campaign managed to exceed this amount in the final 2 days, and Edify was forced to follow through. Unfortunately, this video is no longer available and there doesn't seem to be archives, so it's impossible for me to independently verify this footage. But judging from reactions, it seems like he also wasn't drinking enough water. It's kind of crazy that there's not 1, but 2 documented cases of people drinking their own pee over Breaking Bad, and 4 people in total eager enough to step forward as volunteers. But it's almost admirable in a way. Not the act itself, but the fact that they'd actually commit to it. No one could have forced Craig if he refused. It's a real show of character that ultimately led to support for a good cause. And that's the story of the Breaking Bad fans who drank their own pee. I gotta be honest here, I've never really been into butt stuff. Sorry to disappoint, I never got the appeal. Like, I don't care how hot you are, how clean you claim to be. It's not like you're sterilizing your ass with fire. There's no way you're squeezing your turd cutter into an autoclave. So we just cannot reach the requisite level of cleanliness. I'm like the opposite of Messy Tails. You just gotta keep me away from any possible poop-adjacent surface. And then, a few years ago, it seemed like everybody on the internet got memed into eating ass. Not me, though. And after this story, I think you might reconsider. Today's Tales from the Internet. The legend of the threadworm butt plug. I don't know what it is, it just seems like, for some reason, a disproportionate amount of people on Reddit have worms in their ass. Like, you find one story about a Redditor with ass worms, and suddenly it just begets a parade of more Redditors coming to share their ass worm stories. One itchy asshole leads to another itchy asshole. Although previously this was an issue that I mainly just associated with Ralph Wiggum.
And when the doctor said I didn't have worms anymore, that was the happiest day of my life.
Thank you, Ralph. Very graphic.
So I guess it makes sense. One that stands out to me a lot, of course, is the threadworm butt plug story. In September of 2014 on r/sex, a post was made by a user named Wormy McBumbum. Obviously a throwaway account for this post, although throughout the years he did use the account a small handful of times to comment on things like motivational wallpapers, a haunted baby, and an AMA by then UK Labour Party Prime Minister candidate Duncan Enright. But this was primarily an assworm-centric account, so he makes a post on r/sex to tell us the story of an encounter he once had with an old fling. It was a very special night. It was a butt stuff night. He details how him and his fuck buddy took a moment to get really clean first, knowing where things were headed. Can't have a dirty asshole, can we? And then it's time to jump into the action. My fuck buddy and I were getting down to it. We both love anal and toys and all things filthy. So, I had been merrily eating out her butt for some time, and something tickled the end of my tongue. Must be a bit of tissue paper, I thought, so I swept it out with my finger. Yep, white, must be tissue paper. Tissue paper, of course, because of this thorough deep cleaning that had occurred. But that being said, you would hope that a thorough cleaning in preparation for, eating the ass, like ice cream, the orifice that shit comes out of, it would be so thorough as to eliminate any sort of debris, tissue paper or otherwise. Some commenters expressed the same sentiment, to which I replied, no poo-poo.
Poo-poo.
But I digress, you see where this is going. Popped in a butt plug and commenced merrily fucking. You ever see the Coke and Mentos challenge? Picture that, but with an ass full of worms. Then, the plug came out. I thought it would be fun to tie her up, so hands to ankles, ass in the air. Ready for a good old-fashioned ass fucking. A little white thing pops out to say hello, closely followed by another. Two wriggling pals, tickling her chalky starfish with their hypnotic dance. It's kind of like that scene in The Gate where they move the tree out of the way and it opens up the gate to hell. He didn't provide any pictures, of course, so I've taken it upon myself to provide a visual aid. You're welcome. I promptly lose my erection as I realized these are parasitic worms and I probably had one in my mouth. That wasn't tissue paper after all. I sweep them away. Plug goes back in. Don't want any more of them slipping out. I turn her over and fuck her conventionally. Dump load and go to sleep, feeling all kinds of dirty. Just crawl out of her ass, just fucking recorked it. It's like when you go over somebody's house, break something you don't want to know about it, so you kind of half-assed put it back together and put it behind something and just hope that somebody else deals with it later. Although, granted, they're still sleeping in the bed full of the worms that, if you remember, he just swept them off, so they're crawling around in bed with them. And why post this on Reddit at all? Because he wanted advice on how to tell her that she's infested. Not so much advice given though as it is just people being like, hey, you gotta tell her, man, you're being kind of an asshole. To which he responds by basically saying, come on guys, it's not like it's AIDS or something, just a couple worms. It's also advised that she's gonna need medicine and he's gonna need medicine as well in case, he swallowed one of them. But don't worry, he's all covered. Yeah, I feel like a jerk now for not telling her, especially as I took mebendazole. Mebendazole being the drug you take to kill the worms. So not only did he not tell her, he's holding out on the medicine, and if he eats that ass again, he's just gonna reinfect himself. I know it's horrible, but not particularly dangerous. Kinda assumed she must know. To which another now deleted Redditor responded, no, she doesn't know. You think she likes them or something? Funny thing about that, it's not entirely unheard of, especially not on Reddit. Let's take a trip back to 2011 now. Yet another reply thread with Redditors talking about the worms in their asses. This one in a post entitled, What's the Dirtiest Secret You've Promised to Keep? Mr. Twizzle writes, my GF at the time had been Googling white worms coming out my vagina on my laptop. I called her out on it at the same time I called her out on fucking one of my friends behind my back. I promised not to tell anyone. I told everybody. Now, I know it probably felt good to get that kind of comeuppance on someone who cheated on you, but you're not exactly doing yourself any favors. I mean, if your girlfriend had a worm pussy, and you've been fucking the worm pussy, that just tells everyone that you've got a worm pussy dick. Dudes posting their L's at the bar. A few replies down though, someone else doesn't feel as negatively about them. Trouser Demon. Yes, it's called a threadworm. I had them in my ass for years. Partly I was too lazy to get rid of them, partly they don't really cause any problems other than being itchy sometimes. And I like the idea that I was keeping another living creature alive.
I took good care of her.
In the end though, I just took the pill that kills them. The itching got too damn annoying, and I stopped caring about the welfare of tiny, blind, parasitic worms. So you developed paternal feelings for the worms in your ass? I guess I just like the idea of something that utterly depended on my whims for the right to exist. There was a power to it, and the tenderness a god king has for his subjects. Well, most people have kids to get that feeling, but I guess worms in your ass works too. A lot less expensive than having kids too, especially if you leave them untreated. So with that in mind, I know what you're thinking. Why should asses and vaginas have all the fun? can I get worms in my pee hole? OP mentioned that they were in his girlfriend's vagina. I was wondering if there is/would be any way to encourage the worms to live inside a male urethra. Also, where could one get some of these eggs?
I don't like where this is going.
Do you have to ingest them, or would it be better to put them where you want to go, i.e. insert them directly into urethra/anus/etc.? Because of this comment, I tried to see if you could possibly buy pinworm eggs online, but I'm just finding African nightcrawlers and shit like that. No way you're fitting an African nightcrawler in your pee hole. Actually, what am I saying? We've all seen Kids in the Sandbox. The nightcrawler is nothing. In any case, it's not like there's a scarcity of ass worms going around, so what happens once you have your supply situated? Your intentions are no doubt creepy as fucking hell, but here we go. Pinworms can travel into the vagina because of its closeness and similarity to the anus. You hear that, ladies? Don't get all high and mighty on me. Your vagina is close enough to an asshole that a worm can't tell the difference. Although apparently they do die in there because there's nothing for them to eat. Ideally. They just want to eat poop. A male urethra is not similar enough to the anus for them to travel there by their own accord. So yeah, sorry to crush your dreams here, but there's probably not a way to infest your urethra with worms. Although now that I've said that, there's probably at least one of you that's going to take that as a challenge. And now, having watched this video, I imagine that there's maybe some of you that are getting a little paranoid. Maybe all of a sudden you start to feel a little something, little itch that you didn't notice before. Maybe there's an itch you did notice before, now it's getting worse. What are the odds that you have worms? As it turns out, at any given time, something like 14% of the entire US population are infested with assworms. And it's estimated that throughout their lifetime, whether or not they realize it, nearly 100% of all people will have them in their lifetime.
History doesn't always repeat, but it often rhymes. A man finds himself unexpectedly in quite the pickle. A plumbing situation that's bound to get him into a lot of trouble, so he has to come up with a MacGyver-esque solution to prevent the inevitable clog. Of course, I'm talking about none other than the legendary poop knife. It's a tale that I've often seen confused with the poop scissors. The poop scissors, of course, being one of the very first Tales from the Internet videos. And after this recent interaction on Twitter, I figured it was finally time to cover the often requested poop knife, so we can compare and contrast the stories of both of these devices, and bring an end to the confusion once and for all. If you're unfamiliar with the poop scissors, I recommend you watch my old video on it. But if you don't feel like it, here's the crash course on the poop scissors. The poop scissors were one man's secret childhood shame, a story he had shared on Reddit while drunk. He was a fat little kid who liked to eat a ton, but yet, he only emptied his bowels. And I know I say empty your bowels because, you know, I can't curse this early on in the video, but somehow empty your bowels sounds way filthier. He can only empty his bowels 3 times a week. These were massive, colossal logs. Logs that would clog his toilet every single time, until he came up with a plan. What he did was, he took a pair of scissors from an old junk drawer, and he would take these scissors and chop the logs up to make them more palatable for the toilet.
I'm hungry for your poo! Don't make me starve!
But of course, you can't just have turd-used scissors in the normal rotation of household items. So he wrapped them in a handkerchief and hid them away in his closet, only to be taken out when it was time to put them on toilet patrol. A dark secret hidden from his family. Not the case with the poop knife. That one was apparently fun for the whole family. Unlike the poop scissors, which were one man's private shame, the poop knife was a family affair. Shared on January of 2018 to r/confession by a user named Learned Butt. I was 22 years old when I learned that not every family has a poop knife. He begins by explaining that he comes from a family of people who poop big. He's not sure if it's genetics or their diet, but as he puts it, everyone births giant logs of crap. If I had to guess, I'd imagine that like most Americans, this family did not get enough fiber, and that no cup of yogurt has ever seen the inside of their refrigerator. And of course, much like the poop scissors story, the poop knife family also suffered from clogged toilets. So they came up with a solution: the poop knife. It was an old rusty kitchen knife that was hung on a nail in the laundry room, only to be used for that purpose. It was normal to walk through the hallway and have someone call out, "Hey, can you get me the poop knife?" I thought it was standard kit. You have your plunger, your toilet brush, and your poop knife. The way he describes this setup, I can only picture the Resident Evil 7 house. But in any case, he went on thinking this was a normal thing until he was the age of 22. One night, he's over at a friend's house, and after a few poopless days, it's time. He notes that his friends sold weed, and that the place was always full of people making transactions and then sitting around enjoying their goods. So in this crowded apartment, he sneaks off and goes and takes a dump. And he notices that it's gigantic, laying sideways, placed in such a way that he knows that if he flushes, that toilet is going to clog. So he knows what he has to do. He cracks the door and he calls his friend over. And he's like, "Hey, can I use your poop knife?" Obviously, the friend has no idea what he's talking about. He's like, "Use my what?" At this point, Learned Butt is still so certain that everyone has a poop knife. He's thinking maybe there's a proper name for it that he's been using the wrong term for all this time. Obviously he has one, but maybe he calls it by a more delicate name. A fecal cleaver? A dung divider? A guano glaver? I explain what it is I want and why I want it. He starts giggling, and then after the friend starts giggling, he hears all of the people in this weed house laughing. You got all these guys just stoned out of their minds, sitting on some dude's couch, and all of a sudden they hear a door crack open. A guy asks for a poop knife. Of course, they're just absolutely losing their minds. And they all clarify that no, none of them have ever possessed such a device. For this guy, the concept of a poop knife had been so normalized for his whole life. It just had to be a thing for as long as he could remember. And you had to figure when he was a child, he probably had no use for the poop knife. At least I hope. I don't have kids, so maybe I'm wrong about this, but I'm thinking even with some weird gene situation and ultra low fiber in their diet, they're still probably not regularly churning out toilet clogging logs that would require the intervention of a knife. And I sure hope that these parents weren't just handing their child a rusty old turd-encrusted knife to use in the bathroom. But what that also means is that the poop knife is probably something that this guy, he had to work up to as a child. The very first time he needed to go and use the family poop knife was probably a very proud moment for him. Like some kind of rite of passage into manhood, some kind of secular bar mitzvah. All for this crowd of stoners to take the glory away from him all at once. Now at the time of Learned Poop learning this truth about his poop knife, he was married. And of course his pooping situation hadn't really changed, so he kept the poop knife in his new home with his wife. Had it stashed away in their utility closet. So he tells her about this and she's both amused and horrified. And she'd also just assumed this was some kind of regular utility knife, so she had been using it for utility purposes. Thankfully she hadn't been cooking with it, but she'd been doing things like opening up their Amazon packages with the poop knife. After learning this truth, he noted that she went and got her own. Her own utility knife for utility purposes, not a poop knife. And now here's the thing too, you're watching this video like, wow, the poop knife, what a weird, crazy story. Who would ever do something like that? The replies to this thread are filled with people with similar devices and stories. Like you have this one poster named I Am Not Touching You. One night he's at a friend's house, and all of a sudden his sister rushes down and grabs something from their junk drawer. It's a pocket knife, and the friend asks her, hey, what are you doing with the pocket knife right now? The sister responds, the toilet won't flush. And while they're having this conversation, they hear their dad upstairs yelling, who shit this turd? Everyone rushes to the bathroom to see the turd that was shat. Now all 5 of us are in the throne room in admiration of her magnificent turd. And now the dad asks her what she's doing with the pocket knife, to which she responds, it's what I use to cut them. Her mom asks how long she's been doing this, and she says 6 years. Because apparently she just gets massive turds when she's on her period. I feel like for some amount of the viewers here who get periods, a light bulb went off, because I feel like I've heard about that being a thing. In which case you'll want to stay tuned for the end of this video. So anyway, after this revelation, the mother makes sure that the daughter keeps that pocket knife away from everything else. It's her knife now, nobody else's. And the dad threatens to beat their asses if anyone outside the house finds out about this. You also got a user named Warwick123 who describes his brother using poop tongs to cut down what he described as his massive Arnold Palmer cans. Then you've got Mrs. Worley, who also had a family giant turd setup, But they didn't use a knife, they had what they called the poop spatula, which they referred to as the Shatula. Then you also had a user named the Batman, who called himself the poop knifer of his family. The entire family was aware of this practice, although they did not partake themselves. Apparently his dad called it crocodile hunting. And whenever he'd come out of the bathroom, his dad would say, "Kill any crocodiles today?" Or, "How was the hunt?" He also mentioned that although he hated those jokes back then, now that his dad's dead, he kinda misses them. Probably my favorite response from this thread, though, is from a user named Totally Not a Woman. The first time her boyfriend stayed over her place, his poop wouldn't flush. And unlike so many situations like this, he told her. But luckily, she had experience in what to do with such situations. So she goes in, she wraps her hand in 5 plastic bags, and with her hands wrapped in the plastic bags, she smushes his shit until, like, it can fit down into the toilet. Guys, you gotta get yourself a girl like that. Anyway, apparently there is now a website where you can buy your own poop knife. At first I figured it was just a gag website, and you try to cart the poop knife and it's sold out or something like that. But no, these things are 100% real. There's even a note that says this is not a joke, and they're officially endorsed by the man himself, Learned Poop. I love this little artwork they got of the guy confronting the poop emoji with a knife like it was a Final Fantasy enemy or something. I'd think people would be mostly buying these as gag gifts, but judging by some of the comments in the thread, maybe they are in fact seeing use. But anyway, that's the story of the poop knife. Hope that breaks down the confusion. If you like this video, be sure to hit the notification bell, and check out my video about the woman who got stuck in a window trying to throw her poop out of it during a date.